Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a fascinating stack of sources today, really looking at gender roles.
Yeah, how Americans see them right now, how things have changed over time.
Exactly. And what does that evolution actually mean for people?
So for this deep dive, we're drawing from two main places. There's recent survey data on attitudes,
Right, what people think about acceptance, the impact of changes.
and then there's this commentary piece. It gives historical context, asks if these roles are innate or, maybe social constructs.
So our mission here is to sort of cut through all that, pull out the main insights for you.
We want to get a feel for current perceptions, the history behind it all.
Wrestle with different viewpoints on why we have these roles and look at how people feel these changes are affecting them, their families.
Basically getting to the heart of it.
Okay, so let's start with the survey data. What are Americans saying about acceptance, like accepting people in non-traditional roles?
One of the most striking things, really, is that a pretty big chunk of people feel society isn't accepting enough.
Not enough. For both men and women.
Yeah. 43% say society isn't accepting enough of men doing traditionally female things, and 44% say the same for women doing traditionally male things.
Huh. And how many think it's gone too far, like too accepting?
That's much lower, only about 19%, roughly 1 in 5, for both scenarios.
Okay, so the general mood leans towards wanting more acceptance. But does everyone feel that way?
No. That's where it gets really interesting. The survey shows a clear gender gap.
How so?
Women are much more likely than men to say society needs to be more accepting.
Okay.
For men in female roles, is 49% of women saying not enough, but only 36% of men.
Wow, that's a difference.
And for women in male roles, it's even a bit wider. 53% of women versus 35% of men.
So men are more likely to think things are what okay as they are?
Yeah, men are more likely to choose the about right option for acceptance level.
Okay, gender gap noted. What else splits opinion? I imagine politics plays a role.
Oh, absolutely. The partisan divide here is, well, it's stark. Really stark.
Let me guess. Democrats want more acceptance.
Overwhelmingly, around 59% of Democrats feel society isn't accepting enough for both men and women in those non-traditional roles.
And Republicans.
It's a very different picture. They're much more divided. And actually, a significant group leans the other way, thinking society's too accepting.
Really? How many?
Well, for men in female roles, 28% of Republicans say too accepting, while 27% say not enough. It's almost an even split, but leaning slightly towards too much.
That's fascinating. So deep divisions there.
And it gets even clearer when you look within the parties, breaking it down by gender.
Okay, hit me with the extremes.
All right. Republican men are the group most likely to say society is too accepting. About 30% for men in female roles, and 33% for women in male roles.
Wow. Okay, and the other end of the spectrum.
Democratic women. They're by far the most likely group to say acceptance is not enough. We're talking 62% for men in female roles,
6'2"?
and a huge 69% for women in male roles.
Almost 70%. That's a massive perception gap. Really shows how much party and gender shape these views.
It really does.
So, seeing these huge differences in how people view acceptance today, it really makes you ask, well, why? Why are these ideas about gender roles so ingrained? And why the disagreement?
Exactly, and that's where the commentary source comes in. It offers this really powerful argument that these roles we think of as traditional, maybe they aren't so fixed. Maybe they're social constructs.
Social constructs, meaning like things society sort of made up over time, not necessarily natural.
Pretty much. The commentary gives some great examples. Things we strongly associate with gender now, they haven't always been that way.
Like what?
Okay, get this. Pink for girls, blue for boys. Relatively recent. There was a time, like between 1918 and 1940, where pink was actually seen as stronger, more masculine, and blue was delicate for girls.
No kidding. Pink was for boys.
Yep, and high heels. Back in the European Middle Ages, they were exclusively for men. A status symbol, a sign of masculinity.
High heels. Okay, that definitely makes the point that these things change.
Right. It shows that what we connect to, masculine or feminine, isn't set in stone. It's cultural, it shifts.
So where did these roles originally come from, according to the source?
It looks back at early human history. Suggests roles likely started from practical needs. The Paleolithic hunter-gatherer split.
Division of labor, basically.
Yeah. But crucially, the source notes those different tasks were seen as equally important back then. Things shifted again later with agriculture, the Neolithic Revolution.
Okay.
And while those historical divisions made sense for a long time, the commentary's point is that today, Most jobs don't rely on that kind of physical difference between sexes.
So the original reasons, maybe they don't apply anymore.
That's the argument. Past roles based on physical ability or old societal needs don't have to define us today. The context has changed.
Okay, this idea of social constructs, it feels like it hinges on understanding the difference between sex and gender. People often mix those up.
They really do. And the commentary makes a point of clarifying this. It's crucial to the whole argument.
So lay it out for us. Sex versus gender, according to the source.
Okay. Sex, it says, is primarily anatomical, biological. It describes physical characteristics, chromosomes, hormones, anatomy.
Right. Biological fact.
Gender, on the other hand, is presented as more of a social and psychological thing.
Meaning?
Meaning it's about the societal generalizations, the expectations, the stereotypes about how men and women should act, think, feel.
Ah, the shoulds.
Exactly. And the source really emphasizes that this gender part is socially constructed, it's learned, it's performed, and importantly, it shouldn't be rigidly tied only to biological sex.
So gender is more fluid, more shaped by culture.
That's the perspective offered, yeah.
Yeah.
Not purely dictated by biology.
That makes sense as a distinction. But if the commentary argues roles are social constructs, changeable, why do some people feel so strongly that they are natural or necessary? Does it address that?
It does. It acknowledges the arguments often made for traditional roles.
Like what kind of arguments?
Well, views that traditional rules are needed for society to function smoothly. Sometimes it's based on perceived biological differences. Or this idea that certain behaviors are just innate. You know, girls act girly because it's just in them.
That kind of thinking.
Exactly. And the source also mentions how some religious interpretations, like certain readings of the Adam and Eve story, are used to support ideas like male authority within a traditional structure.
Okay, so it presents those views. Does it offer counter-arguments?
It does, within its own analysis.
Right.
It frames religion, for instance, as a personal belief system and also a social construct itself, not necessarily a universal basis for how everyone must live.
And views can change over time, like the color preferences.
Precisely. And against that innate behavior idea, the source points to research suggesting that gender roles are largely learned
Learn how?
through something called gender typing in childhood. Basically, kids pick up on societal stereotypes about what's for boys and what's for girls and start internalizing them.
So society teaches the roles. It's not just automatic.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
And it emphasizes that gender identity, how someone feels inside, how they express themselves, is personal. Trying to force someone into a box based on stereotypes can actually be harmful.
Right. It shouldn't be about forcing conformity.
The individual's expression is key, not just fitting into pre-made, possibly outdated categories.
Okay, so we have these shifting roles, these very different perceptions we saw in the survey. How do people feel these changes are actually affecting things like day-to-day life, work, family?
Yeah, the survey asked about the impact of changes like more women working, men doing more at home.
And what's the general feeling? Good, bad, mixed?
Generally, people seem to think these changes have been more helpful for women than for men.
How so?
Well, 61% think it's made it easier for women to succeed at work, and 57% say it's easier for women now to lead satisfying lives.
Okay, that's a clear majority seeing benefits for women. What about for men?
The numbers are lower. Only 36% think it's made work success easier for men, and 43% say it's easier for men to have satisfying lives.
Interesting gap there, too. What about the impact on families or marriages?
Also seen as somewhat positive overall. 57% think these changes have made it easier for families to earn enough money.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right? More dual-income households.
Yeah, definitely. And marriages.
A bit less consensus there, but still leaning positive. 47% think the changes have made it easier for marriages to be successful.
Okay, but let me guess. Democrats and Republicans see this impact differently.
You guessed it. The political divide is huge here, too.
Yeah.
Democrats are way more likely to see these changes as making things easier.
Easier across the board.
Pretty much. Easier for women's lives, women's careers, family finances, marriages, men's lives, men's careers. Democrats tend to see positive impacts everywhere.
And Republicans.
While some Republicans also see benefits, significant shares believe these changes have actually made things harder.
Harder how?
A full third of Republicans said these changes made marriages harder. That's compared to only 18% of Democrats.
Wow, quite a contrast.
And about a quarter of Republicans felt the changes made men's lives harder. And roughly the same number, 24%, said they made women's lives harder too.
So for a chunk of Republicans, these shifts are seen as detrimental, not helpful.
Exactly. It really highlights just how differently the real-world effects of evolving gender roles are perceived depending on your political viewpoint, according to this survey.
Okay, bringing the commentary piece back in.
Yeah.
It talks about the harm that can come from sticking too tightly to these rigid gender categories, right? Especially when reality is clearly more complex.
Yes, it makes a powerful point there.
Yeah.
It argues that clinging to strict binary stereotypes isn't just, old-fashioned. It actually leads to real harm,
Harm
like condemnation, prejudice, even oppression for people who don't fit neatly into the man or woman box as traditionally defined. It stops people from being their authentic selves, from reaching their potential.
because they don't conform.
Exactly. And the commentary suggests that instead of this rigid binary, we should think about gender as existing on a spectrum.
A spectrum. Meaning more options than just male or female.
Yeah. It acknowledges that people identify in diverse ways, maybe as agender or gender fluid, non-binary. Lots of possibilities beyond just two categories.
Okay. And does the commentary suggest ways to move towards maybe more acceptance or understanding of the spectrum idea?
It does propose a couple of things. One is about media representation needing more positive, varied portrayals of people who don't follow traditional gender norms.
Seeing difference normalized, basically.
Right. And the other big suggestion is about education. Comprehensive lessons in schools that actually explain the difference between sex and gender, discuss identity development.
Helping young people understand themselves and others better.
Exactly. Supporting them as they figure things out, rather than imposing rigid expectations.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've really covered a lot of ground from these sources. We saw the snapshot of American attitudes on acceptance pretty divided, especially along party lines.
And gender lines, yeah. Then we explored that historical perspective, suggesting roles are social constructs, always changing, not fixed biological destiny.
Right, contrasting that with the arguments for traditional roles that the commentary also outlined. And we looked at how people perceive the impact of these shifts. Again, very different views depending on your politics.
And I think a really key insight weaving through this, particularly from the commentary, is this idea of separating gender, the social, psychological part, from biological sex, and viewing gender itself as more of a spectrum.
That feels like a central takeaway. So why does this all matter to you, listening right now? Well, these societal expectations around gender, they touch everyone, don't they?
Absolutely. They shape how we see ourselves, how we interact, the opportunities we perceive, whether you fit the mold, push against it, or somewhere in between.
So understanding the history, seeing how much these roles have changed, and knowing how differently people view their impact today, it gives you context, right? For your own life and for understanding others.
Definitely. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, drawing from that commentary. Given how much gender roles have clearly shifted throughout history and how different they are across cultures, take a moment to think. What parts of today's gender expectations, maybe in your own life or that you see around you, feel most strongly driven by social norms, by what society expects, rather than something truly innate? And, how might recognizing that distinction maybe change how you think about things or the choices you make?
Definitely something to mull over.